What do you know? You have found the Dumb Christian. I am your host, Jonathan, and today we are diving right into Genesis chapter 24. We are going to meet my favorite character in the whole Bible, except for Jesus, and the one that I hate the most in the whole Bible. We are going to explore how Isaac gets his wife, and we are going to deal with a couple of sensitive topics, incest, and some, relationships with what we would consider today as minors. But that was a different culture. That was a different thing, life that was going on way back then in a very different part of the world. The Bible is going to get very real. We're probably going to get a little bit colorful, so buckle up and welcome to Dumb Christian. Okay. Isaac. Remember last time he went to be sacrificed on the altar. And that caused his mother's death, the trauma, the shock to her system. She's old, she couldn't handle it, and she dies. Isaac is mourning the loss of his mother. And Isaac is the only son that Abraham had with Sarah. And so there's this very special connection here. And he's lonely. Isaac is lonely. He's mourning his mother's loss. He's 40 and he's single. Abraham says, okay, I need to find a wife for my son, Isaac. I don't want his wife to be any one of the Canaanite women. Now, God had called Abraham, his family, out of Mesopotamia, out of right? Out of Sumer, because he didn't want the culture, the religions, the pagan worship to infiltrate, to penetrate into Abraham's character. God called him, I'm going to give you this land, the land of Canaan, and I'm going to use you to create a whole new nation. And we don't want to taint the character qualities and the ultimately the religion that God is going to generate through this bloodline. We don't want to taint it with these other pagan religions. So Abraham's trying to figure out, where can I get a wife suitable that's going to accommodate what God is using us for, but is also good enough for my son. And so he thinks to himself, I know, I'll try and get for him a wife from my family back in Sumer. Nahem or Miriam, I can't pronounce it. It's in there. Look it up. So what Abraham does is he gets his head honcho servant. This guy's name is Eliezer. We find out his name is Eliezer elsewhere in the Bible, I think earlier, and it's referenced later. Also, Midrash confirms for us, head honcho servant, Eliezer. We're going to call him Eli, just because I like that name as a nickname for him. Abe calls Eli and says, hey, I want you to make a promise to me that you're going to find for my son a wife. But you got to promise that you're not going to find a wife for him among the Canaanites, and you're not going to take him back to where we came from. Don't take him back to Sumer. But what I want you to do is go back to Sumer, find my family, and find someone in my family descent, a wife suitable for him. And the way that we make this promise isn't like a pinky promise. It's not spitting in your hand and giving it a handshake. The Bible says, I want you to put your hand under my thigh. Basically, what Abraham is saying is, I want you to cup my junk as you promise, swear by my balls that you will not take him back to the land of Sumer and that you won't get a wife for him out of the Canaanites. And sure enough, Ellie's like, okay, sticks his hand up the skirt and right in that sweaty sack spot. And he swears, I will get a wife for your son as best I can. It won't be a Canaanite and I won't take him back there. But what if she won't come back with me? And Abraham says, well, if you do your due diligence and you find the perfect woman, but she won't return with you, then you're free from this oath. Okay, so Eli loads up a buttload of camels, and Midrash tells us that he brings a couple of strapping young men with him to help carry all these goods. Like he loads up with clothes and gold and jewelry and exotic foods, and they head back towards Sumer. Aramaeum Nehemiaeum, something. Read it. Like I said, always read it for yourself anyway. It's better if you read it. But we're just kind of dumb Christianing our way through it right now. So Eli heads to Sumer, and when he gets to the town where Nahor lives, Nahor was Abraham's brother. Nahor had a son named Bethuel, and this is the town where Bethuel lives. And Bethuel has at least 2 kids that we know of, Laban and Rebekah. Anyway, he gets to the town where Bethuel lives, and instead of going into town, Eli has the camels and the guys just kind of rest outside of the edge of town near a watering hole, a well, where people would come out to draw water. And typically you would draw water in the morning to get water for your day's activities. And then at night, as the men are coming in from the fields and working hard out in the construction site and whatever else, the women would come out, draw water to make sure that there's water for feet washing and drinking when the guys come home after a long day of work. So it's evening time. They sit down and rest, and Eli is watching the women come out to the watering well. And there's this really interesting prayer that Eli offers. And he says, "God of my master Abraham." One of the things that I love so much about the Bible is that it doesn't paint this picture like God came down, created a religion, and said, all right, everybody, just do what it says. It actually tells this story of how people are discovering God, of how he's slowly revealing himself through these generations of people who are trying to discover, who is this God? What is he like? And what does he want from us? And here we have this guy, Eliezer. And this is my favorite guy in the whole Bible, obviously, except for Jesus. Because here he is. He's like, I don't really know this God very well. This God has never spoken to me directly, but I've seen my master. I've seen Abraham interact with God. I've seen this God take care of Abraham. I've seen this God make promises to Abraham and fulfill those promises. There's something about this God that is unlike any other God that has ever been worshipped or talked about before. So, God of Abraham, I don't really know how it works to talk to you. I don't really know how you do things, but I'm hoping that you hear me. I'm trusting that you're going to make me successful in my journey because I'm just trying to honor Abraham, who you seem to really love. And so he's just, to the best of his ability, talking to this God he doesn't really know, but he kind of knows about. And he says, God of Abraham, please give me success on my journey. And the way that I'll know you've picked the bride for my master's son, Isaac, is if she offers me a drink of water and voluntarily offers to give water for my camels to drink until they're totally satisfied. Now, it's the evening, and nobody is looking to add one more task, especially watering half a dozen camels, and camels are drinkers. Like, they can drink a lot, right? So this is not just adding like a small little task to their evening. No. They want to get home. They want to eat dinner and binge watch Golden Girls. They don't want to take care of some stranger's camels, let alone let them drink out of their family pitcher, right? So one girl comes up and Ellie asks, hey, can I have a drink of water? And she's like, oh, get away from me, you creep. He asks another girl, hey, can I have a drink from your pitcher? I have a boyfriend. Okay, buddy. Finally, he sees Rebekah. Bible doesn't tell us how old she is. Midrash tells us she's maybe like 14, 15, 16, mid-teens, somewhere in there. And that's an issue that we're going to have to address a little bit later. But he sees her and she's very beautiful. She approaches the well, and he says, can I have a drink? And she says, sure. Now, the picture is that she's carrying this large jar on her shoulder because that's the easiest way to balance this heavy object as you go from the watering well back into town to your home. And typically the idea would be that you would just kind of like tip the jar down from your shoulder because this is the easiest, simplest way to share. But what she does is the Bible tells us that she lowers it off her shoulder and holds it in her hands to give this guy a drink, to give Ellie a drink. And the first thing that this tells him is that she's modest in the way that she interacts with other people, especially other men. This is a character quality. This is a godly trait. Sarah was like this, and she gives him a drink of water. She looks over and sees that he has a swath of camels, and she says, I'll also draw water for your camels to make sure that they can drink. Then the Bible says that Ellie just watches while she does this. This is called, in the Jewish tradition, the camel test. And what's happening here, there's a couple of things that it does for Ellie. First, it shows him that this is a very specific request. It's not something that just anyone would do because, like I said, everyone just wants to get home, kick their feet up, and binge Netflix. So for someone to go out of their way voluntarily, this would have to be a really significant thing. So he's putting like a very what am I trying to say? A very specific parameter around the request that he's asking from God. Show me the right person with this thing that not just anyone would do. The second thing that this is showing Ellie as he watches is giving him insight into her character, because God has called a very specific type of person in Abraham and Sarah when he called them. Like, if you remember when we first meet Abraham and Sarah, the communities that they lived in honored, revered, loved Abraham and Sarah because Sarah was like very selfless. She was had a very servant-like attitude. She eagerly, voluntarily looked for ways to serve other people. She was generous with what they had and giving to other people. And so Ellie is looking for this quality in a woman to be Isaac's wife. We want to find the type of person that Sarah was, because really that's what God's looking for, right? Is that quality of servanthood and generosity in his people. And so this has a twofold value. So he's standing back watching to see how she's going to handle this situation. But why doesn't he intervene when she starts to water the camels and say, okay, that's good enough? The sages say that Ellie watched and waited until she finished watering the camels, until she said, okay, you're all taken care of, have a good day, and started to leave. Because he wanted to know, Ellie was waiting to see if her true character was really that of one of generosity and selflessness. Because, maybe someone would start and then not finish what they said they would do. Maybe at the end of completing the task, they want some sort of reward in return, and he's waiting to see if she really is that selfless and generous, just like Sarah. And sure enough, she gives him a drink. She waters his camels until they're done drinking. Have a nice day. And he falls on his face worshiping God. Again, twofold reasons. One, because God clearly answered his request. Show me these things that I know exactly the right person. And she does these things. But then secondly, because she does possess the qualities of Sarah. She is not just this like, okay, God showed me the person that he should marry, but she is the perfect person for Isaac as a bride. So he falls down on his face, worshiping God. Thank you, God of Abraham. And I love that picture. Like, I don't fully know you, and I don't really know quite how all this works together, but you answered my request. You have given me this good thing, and I'm so thankful. God, thank you for answering this prayer. And then after that, he gets up, chases her down, puts a gold ring on her nose. And I haven't really been able to find out what's the significance of a gold ring on the nose. But then it says he gives her 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. And the Midrash tells us that this is an indication that God appointed her to be the first to receive the law. And although the law later comes through Moses, what we see when God gives the law through Moses, he gives him 2 tablets with 10 commandments. And here we see God, through Eliezer, giving Rebekah 2 bracelets weighing 10 shekels. And that tells us, that Midrash tells us that that's God indicating, I'm going to use her to bring about this great nation. And he says, is there room at your house for my camels and for us to spend the night? And she's like, eager, like, yeah, that'd be great. We've got more than enough room. You guys can totally stay. But let me go check with my dad first. I don't just want to show up, unannounced. Let me go talk to him first. She goes home and says, there's this guy and he's rich. He gave me these jewels. He gave me this jewelry and he would like to spend the night. And then this is where we meet the biggest douchebag in the Bible. In Jewish tradition, there's a guy in the book of Esther named Haman. Hiss. The Jewish tradition says that he is like the worst guy in the Bible, and for good reason. Maybe we'll get there someday. But for me personally, I can't stand Laban. I just want to punch him in his smug little entitled piece of shit face every time I read about him, because he's just the worst. But this is where we meet him. And when Laban hears there's this rich guy who gave me jewels and wants to spend the night, Laban's like, oh yeah, I'm going to take advantage of this situation. Laban is Rebekah's brother. He rushes back to the watering hole, sees that there's this caravan of goods and riches with Ellie, and he's like, hey, I'm Rebekah's brother. Follow me. I'll set you guys up. We got a place for you to stay. Now, Midrash tells us, and again, the Midrash is a collection of commentaries from rabbis and sages across, spanning a lot of time. And it includes sometimes different commentary that don't always match up. And so when I say Midrash says, what I'm referring to is either the most popular commentary in the Midrash or just the one that makes the most sense to me. So Midrash tells us that when Laban brings Ellie and his entourage back to their house, they actually, as a family, not including Rebekah, but Bethuel, Laban, and Rebekah's mother, those 3 conspired to try and figure out how can we steal all this stuff from this guy? How can we get all this stuff for ourselves? And it says they conspired a plot to kill Ellie. And so what they do is they make a meal and they say, hey, why don't you stay for dinner? Come on in, have a meal with us. And they poison the food in the bowl that they placed in front of Ellie. This isn't in the Bible. This is just some extra commentary that goes along with it. But it does give us some insight into the character traits of the family of everyone except for Rebekah. Because remember, we've seen Rebekah's character. She is generous. She's kind. She's compassionate. But the rest of her family is this mischievous, deceptive lot, very greedy and trying to acquire for themselves gain. And we see this big contrast between Rebekah and her family. And they say, eat up, buddy. Welcome. And he says, I can't eat anything until I tell you this amazing God story about how this all happened. So they're just kind of eating, like looking at the bowl, looking at him, waiting for him to finish his story so he'll eat the poison and die. But he tells this story. Look, Abraham, he looks at Rebekah and Laban, your grandfather's brother is old and he has this son named Isaac, and it's the only son he has with his wife Sarah, and he's precious and he's getting older and he needs a wife, so he made me promise on his balls that I would come and get a wife for him out from his family line. And then when I got here, I prayed this prayer that the woman that I would seek would give me a drink and water my camels. And then Rebecca came and did it. And it was just this like amazing chain of events that happened that perfectly matched what my experience of the God of Abraham, your relative, sent me on this journey. And it's just all these pieces have fallen into place. And it's just amazing, right? And so, I'm here to get a wife, and Rebecca fit perfectly into all these scenarios. And wow, so what do you guys think? And they're like, well, if it's, they're like distracted because they're waiting for him to eat the poison. Whatever God, if it's from God, then we can't stop it. But the Midrash tells us that while he was talking, an angel switched the bowl of poison with Bethuel, Rebecca's father. And they say, well, if it's from the Lord, then I guess we can't stop it. Why don't you just eat? Eli eats, and he's fine. Bethuel also eats, and it tells us later that he died. But because they already said, I guess if it's from the Lord, we can't stop it. So they already kind of like shoehorned themselves into this position where they can't go back on what they said. So to try and work around that, he says, oh, great. Then let me take Rebecca and we'll be on our way. And they're like, no. Why don't you stay for a while? Just hang out. Just stay for a couple weeks so that we can, prepare her and celebrate with her and then send her on her way properly. And he's like, you guys, I can't. I'm on a mission from Abraham. I'm on a mission from God, right? So please don't delay me. Let me go to my master and with the success of my mission. And they're like, well, let's ask her what she thinks. And then they bring her into the room and they say, will you go with this man? And the Midrash commentates and says the way that they asked her was deliberately in a way to try and discourage her from leaving, to make her stay. When they say this man, the language that they're using is they're trying to say, do you really want to go with this stranger who we know nothing about to go be a wife to someone you've never met? And yet, Rebecca is not like her family. She hears the story that Eli's telling. She sees all the pieces that have fallen into place. She's been very aware of the pagan gods and how they interact with their worshipers. And there is no God like this God. She's never seen anything like this God. Remember, again, God hasn't like magically established this religion that he's asking people to be a part of. He's slowly revealing himself to people who are willing to see him. And she sees this, and this God is unlike any other God. If this is true, and she says, yeah, I'll go with him. And again, the family kind of screwed themselves by shoehorning themselves into the situation that they can't really back out of now. Laban is going to learn from these mistakes, and he's actually going to cause some major problems for Rebecca's son in the future, where I really, that's the story where I really just want to, stick it to him. Anyway, so they say, well, I guess we can't stop it. We've already said yes. And then it says that Eli gave a bunch of gifts to Laban and Rebecca's mother. He doesn't give gifts to Bethuel because somewhere along the line he dies. Bible doesn't tell us, but Midrash says it's because the angel switched the bowls of poison, right? So Eli lavishes gifts on Laban, which really kind of like triggers this incessant need for greed that he can't be satisfied. Insatiable greed. Yeah, that's what we're going to go with. And anyway, that's bad. But he gives him gifts. And then he takes Rebecca, saddles up on the camels, and they return back to the homestead where Abraham is waiting. As they begin to return, Rebecca notices there's a man in the field. And on their journey, while they're returning, there was something stirred inside Isaac's spirit that led him to go worship out in the field. And it says, as they returned, Rebekah saw Isaac meditating. And he's out there. Midrash tells us he's raising his hands to the heavens as he prays in worship to God. And when she sees this man, something inside her spirit stirs and says, "This is a righteous man." And they get closer, and she asks Eli, who is this guy? And he says, that's Isaac. That's the guy I'm bringing you back to marry. She covers her face with a veil. She gets off the camel, and Isaac approaches. And Midrash tells us that Isaac is hot. Like, he would be on the poster next to the Justin Timberlake poster. Like, those are the ones on this girl's wall. JT. Oh, actually, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, for those of you. Yeah. Before Justin Timberlake, the original JT. And and then we have a poster of Isaac. He would be in Teen Bop magazine. And he looks at her and he finds her very attractive, and he gently escorts her into his mother's tent where they do the dirty. They have sex right then, right there, and that's the marriage ceremony. Marriage was very different back then. We've talked about it in an earlier episode where the evolution of marriage, it started with two people met in the street, decided they want to get married, did the dirty, and that was it. They were married. Sex is the tying the knot moment back then. That was the ceremony that said, we are now husband and wife. We have committed to each other in this covenant of marriage. And then the ceremony process actually, evolves into a party and a ceremony and all these things. But originally it was just, we agree to commit to each other. They had sex, and it says that Isaac was comforted by Rebekah during this, while he's mourning the loss of his mother, and he loved her dearly. There are still two issues in this story that I don't just want to sweep under the rug, and I want to make room for us to acknowledge and wrestle with. The first being her age. She's her mid-teens, and in our day, today, she would be considered a minor. I don't know that there's any easy way to frame this or paint this picture that makes it easier to swallow, but back in that day, it was very common that girls 14, 15, 16 were married off to older men who have built for themselves a livelihood, who can take care of a family, right? It's not just some 18-year-old who's working at McDonald's. This guy has established himself as able to care for and provide for a family. And she's had her period, and she's now mature enough physically to start raising a family. I'm not advocating that this is a valid or even healthy way to approach a marriage relationship. That was the culture, right? I think there is value today in taking the time to make sure that both men and women are spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally mature enough to handle the responsibilities of raising a family and engaging in sex. I think that's a very, there's a lot that goes on there that, especially in our day and age today, where you just see it everywhere and it's just flaunted and abused and mistreated. But the culture in that day was very different, and look, that's just the way that it was. The other issue that we're going to have to deal with that isn't nearly as easy, not to say that a 14-year-old marrying a 40-year-old is easy to swallow, but there's another issue that I think is very fair and valid for us to wrestle with, and it's the fact that Isaac is marrying basically his cousin. The patriarchs marry their relatives, have sex with, and have kids with their relatives. Abraham and Sarah were half siblings. Isaac and Rebekah are cousins, and then their child, Jacob, marries Laban's daughters. Then they're basically cousins. Now, in a couple of books, Leviticus, God clearly and explicitly condemns incestuous relationships. In the beginning of Genesis, when we see Adam and Eve's kids, and the Midrash tells us that Cain has sex with his sister, we can kind of understand, if that's the case, that that relationship is kind of essential because there's no one else to have sex and kids with. And so maybe that's just the way that it has to be. And then later after the flood, we see Noah's kids having relationships, marrying their cousins, again, out of necessity because there's just no one else to raise families with. And there's some arguments of scientists that the genetic code at that point had not yet been corrupted, and there was plenty of like genetic diversity within their genes that it wouldn't cause health issues, which is the argument today, that that's really, it's a genetic thing that caused birth defects, incest, because the genetic diversity isn't there. And they're just kind of like causing some health issues if brothers and sisters and cousins, right, like have kids. But why do the patriarchs, and when I say patriarchs, I'm not talking about like, you know, the man who can get away with anything and do whatever he wants. When we talk about patriarchs in the Bible, it's the three men who lay the groundwork for a lineage, a bloodline of people who God uses to bring about the Messiah. The men who paved a way by being firm in their belief, by being strong, compassionate, gentle, servant-like, but strong. These were the men who led the charge, who led their families by following God. And that's what we mean when we say the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the three patriarchs, and they each married their relatives. And I don't really have a good answer. There's actually very few scholars who even talk about the fact that they married and had sex with their relatives. And even fewer that even offer any type of explanation. And I really haven't even found any. And I've done a fair amount of investigative research trying to find out, you know, according to scholars, how do we explain this? Where do we come up with an excuse for this? Because this isn't out of necessity like Cain and Abel and his sisters or Noah. There's plenty of people in the world. Why is incest okay for the patriarchs and then later God condemns it? Like, what's going on here? And the best, and this might not be an easy pill to swallow, and it's fair if it's not, but the best explanation that I can wrap my head around is that when we see the type of person that Rebecca is, and Midrash tells us that she is a rare person. It says she's a rose among thorns, or a flower among thorns, or something beautiful among filthy, ugly things. She possesses the same qualities as her aunt, Sarah. And you ever like look at a kid and then their parent, like you're friends with their parent, and you say to the parent, man, that kid is just like you when you were their age. There's this personality, this character trait that's passed down, not just physical looks, but like actual personality and character qualities that are passed down in the family. And when we see Rebecca's character, when she serves Eli and waters his camels, that it's this unique quality that only this family possesses, and it's just this trait that only a few people have: Sarah, Rebecca, and later Rachel and Leah. And it's the type of personality, the type of character trait that God wants to incorporate into this family bloodline of people who are going to be used to bring about the Messiah, Mashiach, the one who is going to save and bless the world, redeem creation, and restore everything the way he wanted. And he wants to create this family line, this bloodline, this character. He wants to preserve this character trait in this line of people who are going to save everyone. And that's, even that I know is still a little like, eh. And if that's too much to handle, if that's still not enough, then I would just say it's the Bible. And what makes the Bible, one of the things that makes the Bible so great is that it doesn't pull any punches. It doesn't pretend everyone was perfect and did everything the way that they should have done it. It just records it the way that it happened, and it says, look, this is life. Take it or leave it. It's the good, the bad, the ugly. It's everything all in one, whether we like it or not. And that is Genesis chapter 24, where we see the camel test and we meet a real douchebag. I love you guys. I'll catch you later. Guys, thank you so much for walking with me through that very awkward and some tenuous circumstances, right? With some weird situations between cousins. Yeah. Anyway, check us out on YouTube. We have some exclusive content up there. Dumb Christian Podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe, like, ring that bell so you can know when new content is dropping. I love you guys. I'll catch you later.